The call came at 11:14 on a Tuesday morning. I know the exact time because I've replayed it in my head so many times that the numbers are burned into me now. 11:14. My son-in-law was the one who finally reached someone. Not my daughter, not anyone she'd told about me, but the woman who runs the front desk at the community center where I volunteer on Tuesdays. He called her because he'd run out of options, because my daughter hadn't picked up. Not once. I didn't know any of that yet. I was on the floor of the Shoppers Drug Mart on Brock Street when the paramedics arrived. I remember the fluorescent lights above me. I remember someone putting a fold jacket under my head. I remember thinking, very clearly, I need to call my daughter. And then I didn't remember anything for a while. They told me later it was my heart, not a full attack. The cardiologist was careful with his words, the way doctors are when they want to be honest but not frightening, but a serious arrhythmia, the kind that needed immediate attention, the kind that could have gone the other way if someone hadn't found me quickly. I'd been reaching for a bottle of vitamins. My cart had tipped over. A young man named, I never did catch his name, had been the one to call 911. A stranger had saved my life. My daughter was at a spa in Kelowna. I didn't know that yet either. I'm getting ahead of myself. But I need you to understand what I walked into when I woke up, because it matters. It matters for everything that comes after. I am 67 years old. I've lived in Kingston, Ontario my whole life, grew up here, raised my family here, buried my husband here 11 years ago. My daughter is 41. She lives about 20 minutes away, out past the Cataraqui River, in a house that has a double garage and a finished basement and a yard that backs onto a walking trail. A beautiful house. A house I helped her put a down payment on, if I'm being honest, though she's never mentioned that to anyone as far as I know. We were close once. Or I thought we were. The way you think you know the texture of something until you press on it, and it gives way. She has 2 children, my grandchildren, who I see on holidays and occasional Sundays when it's convenient for her schedule. My son-in-law is a good man. Quiet. The kind of man who looks at you like he wants to say something and then doesn't. He's never been unkind to me. He's also never been able to change anything. I have my routines. Tuesdays at the community center, where I help with a literacy program for newcomers. Thursdays I walk with my neighbor Gwen, who has been my friend since our kids were in school together. I have my book club, my garden, my cat, whose name is Chester and who is genuinely the most consistent relationship in my life. I know how that sounds. I mean it anyway. I'd been having some fatigue in the weeks before. A little breathlessness on the stairs. Nothing I thought was serious. My regular checkup wasn't until March, and I'd told myself I'd mention it then. I was not the kind of person who made a fuss. I should have made a fuss. I woke up in Kingston General to a room that smelled like antiseptic and something floral, which turned out to be a small pot of yellow mums on the windowsills. I stared at them for a long time before I understood where I was. A nurse came in, young, dark hair, a voice that was professionally calm in a way that took the edge off my panic. She explained what had happened. She said the doctors had stabilized my heart rhythm. She said I'd been unconscious for several hours. She said there was someone in the waiting room who'd been asking about me. I thought, my daughter is here. It was my son-in-law. He came in looking like a man who hadn't slept and hadn't eaten, and wasn't sure if he was allowed to be there. He sat in the chair beside my bed and he held my hand, which surprised me because we've never been demonstrative with each other. And he said, I'm so glad you're awake. I asked where my daughter was. He looked at the window, then at the floor, then back at me. And he said, she's not reachable right now. I've been trying. Not reachable, that's the phrase he used. I told myself there was an explanation. Car trouble, a dead phone. Something. I am a person who has always, all my life, looked for the reasonable explanation first. How long have I been here? I asked. Since yesterday morning, he said. It's Wednesday now. I had been in that hospital for over a day, and my daughter didn't know, or she knew and she hadn't come. The nurse later, when my son-in-law had stepped out to get coffee, told me quietly that the hospital had made many attempts to contact my emergency contact, that my daughter's number had been called. She paused, seemed to be deciding something. She said, many times. She didn't give me a number. I found out the number later from my son-in-law, who had seen the call log when he'd finally gotten someone at the hospital to talk to him. 31 times. The hospital had called my daughter 31 times over the course of that first day. She had not picked up once. I stayed in hospital for 4 days. I had tests. I had a procedure to get a small monitor implanted under the skin near my collarbone. A device that would track my heart rhythm for the next 2 years and send data to my cardiologist. I had conversations I'd never had before about blood thinners and stress levels and what my life was going to look like going forward. Important conversations. The kind of conversations a person probably shouldn't have alone. I had them alone. My son-in-law came every evening after work. He brought me a phone charger and a bag with some of my things from home. He'd apparently asked Gwen, my neighbor, to go into my house and pack what she thought I'd need. He brought soup in a thermos once, which I thought was one of the kindest things anyone had done for me in a long time. He sat with me and we talked about the kids, about logistics, about nothing much. We did not talk about where my daughter was. On the third day, I asked him directly. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said she went to Kelowna with some friends. A long weekend that turned into a week. She said she needed to decompress. Things have been stressful. Things have been stressful. I looked at the monitor on the wall tracking my heartbeat. I thought about the word stressful. I thought about my daughter in Kelowna decompressing while a hospital tried to reach her 31 times. Does she know, I asked, about what happened to me? He looked at me in a way that told me everything. I reached her last night, he said. She knows now. Last night, 4 days in, she'd known for less than 24 hours and she still wasn't here. I didn't say anything. I turned and looked at the yellow mums on the windowsill. Someone had watered them while I was sleeping, I realized. I didn't know who. Some small act of care from an invisible stranger. I swallowed everything I wanted to say and I said thank you for being here. And I meant it. I meant it completely. I came home on a Friday. My son-in-law drove me. He'd arranged for Gwen to be at my house when I arrived, and she'd stocked my fridge and turned the heat up and put fresh sheets on my bed. Chester greeted me at the door like I'd been gone for a year. I sat down at my kitchen table and I drank the tea Gwen made me and I thought, these are my people. The man who married my daughter and my neighbor of 30 years and a cat, this is what I have. My daughter called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. I don't know why, exactly. Instinct, maybe. Self-preservation. Something in me that wasn't ready. She called again the next morning. I let that go too. On Sunday, she texted, Mum, I really think we should talk. I know you're upset, but it's not what you think. Can I come over? I stared at that message for a long time. It's not what you think. There's a phrase that tells you everything. It doesn't say, I'm so sorry. I don't know how this happened. Please forgive me. It says, your perception is the problem. I did not respond. What I did instead, and I want to be honest about this because I think honesty is the only thing I have left, was go very quiet inside. Not cold, not angry, exactly. I just got quiet. The way you get quiet when something has been confirmed that you suspected for a long time and didn't want to look at directly. Because here's the thing I hadn't said to anyone, not even to Gwen. This wasn't the first time. 2 years before, I'd had a bad fall on my back steps in January. Ice. The city hadn't salted our street yet. I'd fractured my wrist and bruised 2 ribs, and I'd lain on those steps for 20 minutes in -15, before my neighbor across the street happened to look out his window. My daughter had come to the hospital that time. She'd stayed for about 40 minutes. She'd taken a call partway through and stepped out into the hallway, and I'd heard her laughing, just faintly, through the curtain. When she came back, she'd said she had to get home because the kids had an early morning. I'd told myself she has a busy life. I'd told myself she has 2 kids and a job and a house to manage. I'd told myself she's not a natural caregiver. Some people aren't. I'd told myself a lot of things, and then there was the matter of the money. My husband had left behind a modest estate, our house, some savings, some RRSPs. When he died, we'd agreed as a family, my daughter and I, that I would keep the house and live in it as long as I wanted, and that whenever I eventually sold, I'd divide the proceeds. That had felt fair to me at the time. Generous, even. What I hadn't anticipated was that every conversation about money after my husband died had my daughter's fingerprints on it, little questions, casual mentions. Have you thought about downsizing, Mom? The market is really good right now. You don't really need all that space, do you? Not pushy. Never pushy. Just present. Persistent, like water finding a crack. 2 years ago, I'd sold the house. The market was good, like she'd said. I'd moved into a tidy 2-bedroom condo near the waterfront, which I love. I genuinely love it. The light in the mornings, the walk to the market, Chester in the window watching the birds. I'd given my daughter $110,000 from the sale. I'd kept $140,000 for myself. She'd seemed pleased. She hadn't said thank you in any way that I can clearly remember. I had $140,000 in a GIC and some savings accounts. Enough to live on carefully. Enough for emergencies. Enough that I was not dependent on anyone, which had always been important to me. I thought about that money while I sat in my quiet condo recovering from a cardiac event, ignoring my daughter's texts. The week after I came home, my son-in-law brought the kids over on a Saturday. He texted first to ask if it was okay. He didn't assume, which I respected. My grandchildren are 9 and 12. The younger one, the boy, ran to me at the door and put his arms around my middle and said, "Grandma, I was worried about you." Just like that, straight out. The way children say true things. I held on to him longer than I probably should have. My daughter wasn't with them. My son-in-law and I sat in the kitchen while the kids watched a movie in the living room, and he said, "She's embarrassed. I think she doesn't know how to come to you right now." "She's had 2 weeks," I said. "I know," he said. 31 calls, I said. I hadn't meant to say it like that, so flat, so specific. But there it was, he was quiet. Then, "I know." We sat for a while. I poured him coffee. He drank it without speaking, and I thought about what kind of man stays in a marriage like that. A good man, I thought. The kind who shows up at hospitals and brings soup in thermoses and texts the neighbor. The kind who teaches his 9-year-old to say, "I was worried about you," and mean it. "She's going to want to explain," he said eventually. "She can want that," I said. He nodded. He didn't push. She came on a Tuesday. I'd gone back to the community center that morning. My cardiologist had cleared me for light activity, and I wanted to see my regulars, the folks in my literacy group who'd sent a card signed by everyone, including one woman who'd drawn a small heart beside her name because her letters were still coming. Being back there did something good for me, reminded me of what I was for, outside of being someone's mother. I came home and she was sitting on the bench outside my building. She looked, I don't know, smaller than usual. My daughter has always carried herself with a kind of authority, a forward momentum, like she's always already moving toward the next thing. But sitting there on that bench, in her coat with her hands in her lap, she just looked like a person who didn't know what to do with herself. I let her in. I made tea. I did these things on purpose, mechanically, to give myself something to do with my hands. She talked for a long time. I let her. She talked about how the Kelowna trip had been planned months in advance, and she'd had her phone on silent because she needed to disconnect, and she'd assumed that if anything happened, someone would find a way to reach her, and she was sorry. She was so sorry. She hadn't known it was going to be serious. I let her finish. Then I said, "The hospital called 31 times. She opened her mouth. "Your phone was on silent," I said, "not off." "Silent, which means you could have picked up if you'd looked at it." She said she'd been sleeping. She said she'd been in a spa with no cell service, but that didn't match with her phone being on silent. You don't put a phone on silent when there's no service. You put a phone on silent when you don't want to be interrupted. I didn't say that. I just looked at her. "Mom," she said, "I love you. You know that." And here's the thing I've been sitting with ever since. I think she does love me. In the way that people love things they take for granted, in the way that people love the furniture in their childhood home. It's real. It's just not active. It doesn't show up. And love that doesn't show up when it matters. I don't know what to call that. I'm not sure love is even the right word for it. "I know you do," I said. We sat with that for a while. She asked if I was okay. I said I was going to be. She asked if we were okay. I said I needed some time. She left after an hour. She hugged me at the door, tightly, like she was trying to make something stick. I hugged her back. I am her mother. I will always hug her back. But I stood at my window and watched her walk to her car, and I felt something settle in me like snow after a storm. Quiet, cold and clean. I had some decisions to make. I called my lawyer the following week. I want to be clear. I am not a vengeful person. I am not someone who acts from spite. But I am 67 years old and I have a heart that needs monitoring, and I have watched, for longer than I want to admit, the slow accumulation of evidence about what my life is worth to certain people. And I decided I was going to be clear-eyed about it. I had a will. I'd written it after my husband died, as you're supposed to. It left everything to my daughter, with a small bequest to a local hospice organization that had cared for my husband in his last weeks. That will reflected who I thought I was leaving the world to. That will reflected assumptions I no longer held. I did not cut my daughter out entirely. She is the mother of my grandchildren, and those grandchildren are part of my heart in a way that is uncomplicated and whole. I made provisions for them, educational funds, trusts that would be theirs when they turned 25. I kept that. But the rest of it, my savings, my condo, the proceeds when it eventually sells, I redirected. Some to the hospice, some to the literacy program at the community centre. A portion, and this one surprised even me when I decided it, to my son-in-law directly, with a note explaining why. I also told Gwen what I'd done, not the specifics. Just that I'd updated my will, that my wishes were clear now, that she was named as a secondary contact, and I'd like her to actually be the first person anyone calls if something happens to me. She cried a little. I told her to stop. We walked our usual Thursday route and didn't talk about it again. My daughter found out about the will eventually. Not because I told her. I didn't see any reason to make it a confrontation, but because I'd mentioned to my son-in-law that I'd updated it, and he, in his quiet way, had apparently said something to her. Not everything, just enough. She called me on a Thursday evening. Her voice had a different quality to it than the Kelowna conversation, less ashamed, more rattled. She asked if it was true that I'd changed my will. I said it was. She asked why, and here's where I surprised myself. I'd expected to feel something sharp, defensiveness or satisfaction or the adrenaline of confrontation. Instead, I just felt tired and honest. Because I was in a hospital, I said, and you didn't come. And that wasn't the first time I needed you and you weren't there. And I decided I needed to be honest about what that means. Mom, that's punishing me. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm just being realistic. The people who show up for me, they're the ones I want to take care of. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I didn't think you'd actually do something like this. No, I said, I don't think you did. We hung up after a few more minutes. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a door slamming or names being called. It was just two people at the end of a conversation that had been a long time coming. I want to be honest about how I feel now, because I think that matters. I miss her. I miss the daughter I thought I had, which I know isn't quite the same thing as missing the one who exists. I miss Sunday dinners and the way she used to call me when something funny happened at work, before the calls got shorter and further apart, and eventually mostly logistical. I miss feeling like someone's mother in the full sense of the word. But I also feel, and this is harder to explain, lighter, like I've set something down that I was carrying without realizing how heavy it was. The constant recalibration of my expectations. The quiet work of telling myself that this time would be different, that she was busy, that I shouldn't take it personally. That was exhausting in a way I hadn't let myself name. Gwen and I walked last Thursday in the first real snow of the season. The path along the waterfront was quiet, everything muffled, the lake grey and wide and calm. She asked how I was doing. Better than I thought I would be, I said. That's usually how it goes, she said. My son-in-law still brings the kids on Saturdays sometimes. My granddaughter asked me last week to teach her how to make butter tarts, which are my mother's recipe and which I have been making since I was 14 years old. We spent an afternoon in my kitchen with flour on our hands and the radio on, and she was serious about it, this child, the way 12-year-olds are serious about things they actually care about. She wrote the recipe in a notebook she'd brought specifically for that purpose. She underlined real butter twice. I thought, this is the inheritance that matters. This right here. Chester sat on top of the refrigerator and watched us with the profound indifference of a cat who has seen everything. The tarts came out perfectly. My heart monitor sent its weekly data to my cardiologist, and everything came back within normal range. I walked to the market the next morning and bought flowers for my kitchen table. Not yellow mums this time, orange ranunculus, because it was that kind of day, bright and a little defiant. I am 67 years old. My heart works. My hands make butter tarts from memory. The people who love me show up. That is more than enough to build a life around.